Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're spending some time with the finest source of gentle chaos the world has ever produced, family. Not the big blow-ups, not the feuds, just the quiet, decades-long systems that relatives build around each other. The rules nobody agreed to. The traditions nobody remembers starting. The small, loving power struggles that play out over casserole dishes and group chats and who gets grandma's lamp. Everyone's family has at least one of these stories. Most families are entirely made of them. So grab whatever you're drinking, get comfortable, and settle in. Because tonight's stories are long, they're low stakes, and every single one of them ends with everybody still showing up to dinner. Our first story comes from someone who spent 14 years believing something about their own sister that turned out to be, well, let's call it creative. My older sister announced her shellfish allergy at a family dinner when she was 19 and I was 16. I remember it clearly because it was delivered with the gravity of a press conference. She set down her fork, waited for a pause in the conversation, and informed the table that she'd been tested, that it was serious, and that she'd appreciate everyone being careful going forward. And we were careful. Oh, we were careful. For 14 years, my entire family reorganized itself around this allergy. Shrimp disappeared from holiday menus. My mom developed an entire parallel Thanksgiving appetizer lineup because the traditional crab dip was now, in her words, a weapon. When my cousin got married, the reception menu was adjusted. When we went out for celebration dinners, entire restaurants were vetoed. My dad kept a mental list of safe places, and seafood restaurants fell off the family rotation entirely. My uncle's favorite crab shack, a place with 20 years of family birthday history, got quietly retired. He still brings it up sometimes, in the way men of a certain age mourn restaurants. The allergy had rules, and the rules had a way of expanding. Early on, it was just no shellfish in her food. Within a few years, it was cross-contamination. Shared fryers became a concern. Then it was proximity. She'd ask for the shrimp cocktail to be seated at the far end of the table, and my family, being my family, complied so thoroughly that the shrimp eventually stopped being invited at all. I want to be clear that nobody resented this. You don't resent a medical condition. We adapted, the way families do, until the adaptations just became the way things were. My little nephew grew up believing shrimp was something other families ate, like a foreign custom. Now, over the years, there were small things. I noticed them without noticing them, the way you file things away in a drawer you never open. The allergy had no origin story, no childhood incident, no hospital visit anyone could recall, no EpiPen ever in 14 years. Restaurants never seemed to worry her when she chose them, only when other people did. And once, at a wedding, I watched her eat 2 crab rangoons at the buffet, and when I stared at her, she looked me dead in the eye and said the filling was imitation, and I believed her. Because it was easier, and because the alternative was too strange to hold. The truth came out on an ordinary Tuesday in a food court. I was at the mall across town, picking up a birthday present, and I saw my sister sitting alone at a small table outside one of those quick seafood places. And she was working her way through a shrimp basket, not cautiously, not experimentally. This was the practiced rhythm of a regular. Tail in a little bucket, next shrimp, no hesitation. She had a routine. She had a preferred sauce. I didn't go over. I just stood there behind a mall plant like a private investigator, watching my sister eat what should have been, by every rule our family had lived under. Since 2000 and something, roughly 9 ambulances worth of shellfish. I decided not to say anything right away. partly shock, and partly, if I'm honest, because I wanted to understand the scope of it first. So I ran a little experiment. The next family dinner, I mentioned, casually, just making conversation, that a new seafood boil place had opened near the mall and that I'd heard the shrimp was incredible. And my sister, without a flicker, said it was such a shame she'd never get to try it, and then, this is the part that still amazes me, she asked whether it had one of those shared fryers, out of concern for her allergy, about a restaurant she would never eat at to protect a condition she did not have, while I sat there knowing she probably had a loyalty card to the place 3 doors down. When I finally talked to her, privately, gently, no audience, she folded faster than I expected. And the origin story, it turns out, wasn't malicious at all. It was so much smaller and so much more human than that. At 19, she'd gotten mildly sick after a seafood dinner she hadn't wanted to attend, at a restaurant our aunt had chosen, and she'd said the word. Allergy, once, mostly to get out of the follow-up dinner the next weekend, and then it worked. It worked so well. People were careful with her. Menus bent around her, and there was never a good moment to take it back, because how do you unannounce an allergy? So 1 year became 5, became 10, and somewhere in there it stopped being a lie she was telling and became, in her words, just a thing about me that isn't. True, she'd been eating shellfish the entire time. Away games only, food courts, work lunches, cities where the family wasn't. 14 years of a double life conducted entirely through shrimp. We agreed she had to tell Mom. What actually happened is that she developed a tolerance over the following year, a slow, medically fascinating recovery she narrated at holidays. Cautiously trying her first shrimp in 14 years at Christmas while the family held its breath, then a second at Easter until, at last, the allergy was declared healed. My mother cried, my uncle got his crab shack back. And my sister, I have to hand it to her, ate that first ceremonial Christmas shrimp with the trembling wonder of a woman tasting the sea for the very first time, while making brief, unreadable eye contact with me across the table. That story ends there. 14 years of menu diplomacy, 1 lifetime ban on a crab shack, and a miraculous recovery timed perfectly to avoid ever having to say the words, I made it. Up? Somewhere in that family there's a mother who believes she witnessed a medical miracle, and honestly, letting her keep it might have been the kindest possible. Ending. Speaking of relatives who found creative ways to manage the family from a position of power, our next story involves a grandmother who discovered that a will works even better if you never actually finish writing it. My grandma is 81, in excellent health. Her daughter calls her a fortress. And for the past 6 years, she has run our family like a small parliamentary government through one mechanism, the will. Not the reading of the will, she's very much alive. I mean the ongoing, never finished, perpetually revised will, which she discusses openly at every family gathering, the way other grandmothers discuss the weather. It started at a Thanksgiving. My cousin Dana mentioned, harmlessly passing the potatoes, that she'd always loved Grandma's blue casserole dish, the big ceramic one that's been at the center of every family meal since before I was born. And Grandma smiled, patted Dana's hand, and said, well, it'll be yours someday, sweetheart. Lovely moment. Genuinely touching. Dana teared up a little. The following Easter, I helped Grandma carry that same dish in from the car, and she squeezed my arm and said, careful with that. It's going to be yours one day, you know. I didn't think much of it. Grandmothers say things. But then at Christmas, I overheard her promise the dish to my Aunt Carol. And at a birthday in the spring to my brother. And at a cookout that summer to Dana again. Which you'd think would be a reset, except by then Dana had apparently fallen out of favor over a missed phone call, because Grandma added, "If things keep going well," which is not a phrase you want attached to your inheritance. That's when I started paying attention, and the system came into focus. The will, this living, breathing, unwritten document, was Grandma's economy, and every object in her house was currency. Good behavior moved you up. Miss Sunday calls moved you down. Nothing was ever confirmed and nothing was ever final, which was precisely the genius of it. A finished will is leverage spent, but an open will is leverage. Forever, and she narrates the market movements out loud. She'll be showing someone the china cabinet and say, "Within earshot of 3 grandchildren, I had this promise to Michael, but Michael's been so busy lately," and let it hang there, and I promise you Michael calls her twice the following week. She once reassigned a rocking chair in real time, mid-argument, at a 4th of July barbecue. My uncle disputed her recollection of a story, and she turned to his sister and said, "Linda, remind me to talk to you about the rocking chair." And my uncle conceded the point about the story immediately. I decided to test the system once, gently. I'm not proud of it, but in my defense, it was for science. One Sunday visit, I mentioned offhandedly that my apartment had a perfect empty corner for a reading lamp, and that I'd always loved the brass one in her hallway. Then I called her every Sunday for 5 weeks, which I should have been doing anyway. At the end of the 5th week, she took me down the hallway, touched the lamp, and said, "I want you to have this. It's decided." And then, this is the detail that elevated the whole thing for me. She went to the kitchen drawer, took out a little spiral notebook, licked her thumb, flipped past several pages that I was not permitted to see, and made an entry. There's a notebook. There has been a notebook apparently for years. The standings are being kept. My cousin swears she once glimpsed a page with erasure marks under the casserole dish's entry, layers and layers of erasure, like sediment, one name written. Over another, a geological record of 6 years of family politics. Here's the ending you might not expect. Nobody in the family wants to fix this. We talked about it once, the cousins, quietly at a graduation party, and we realized the will system is the reason Grandma gets 4 phone calls every Sunday. And visitors every weekend, and a full table at every holiday at 81, when half her friends' families have scattered. Is it leverage? Absolutely. Is it also the glue? Also, absolutely. My brother put it best, it's the cheapest rent in the world. You pay in phone calls. So the casserole dish remains in play. Current leader unknown. The notebook updates weekly. And my grandmother, the fortress, sits at the center of it all like a little queen, promising the same lamp to whoever showed up that week. Loved, visited, called, and completely, magnificently in charge. That story ends there. Running your family like a stock exchange where the currency is casserole dishes and the dividends are phone calls is honestly a masterclass in retirement. Planning. The lawyers of the world could never design an estate plan half as effective as one small notebook and the phrase, "It'll be yours someday." Moving from inheritance to investment, our next story is about a mother who has been planning a wedding for 26 years. The bride hasn't been involved. The bride, for most of that time, wasn't aware. The bride, it should be noted, is single. My mom started my wedding binder the year I was born. I know this because the binder itself says so. The first page is dated, in her handwriting, 3 weeks after my birthday. I found out about all of this when I was 26, which means the binder and I are, functionally, twins. I discovered it the way you discover most family secrets, looking for something else. I was home for a weekend, hunting through the hall closet for a photo album, and I pulled down a thick white 3-ring binder with a ribbon on the spine. I assumed it was a photo album. It was not a photo album. The cover page, in beautiful lettering, read, "Someday." I want to walk you through what 26 years of maternal patience looks like, because the binder is organized into eras and you can watch the decades. Change through its pages like rings in a tree. The early section is from the 90s, magazine clippings, actual scissors and glue clippings of wedding dresses with sleeves the size of regional weather. Systems. There's a guest list from around the year 2000 that includes several people who have since passed away and one man who is currently in prison. There is a page of flowers with prices noted in pencil, and then, this is the part that got me, renoted and renoted again in different inks as she'd gone. Back over the years and updated the pricing. My mother has been tracking wedding industry inflation longitudinally as a private research project for a wedding with no date, no venue, and no groom. Because, and I cannot stress this enough, there has never been a groom. I was single when I found the binder. I have been single for most of the binder's operational lifetime. The binder does not care. The binder is not about a man. The binder is about readiness. When I confronted her, confronted is too strong, I walked into the kitchen holding it, and she looked at it, and then at me, with the expression of a woman who'd been rehearsing for this moment and was, of course, prepared. She was completely unembarrassed. She took it from me, flipped to a tab labeled Venues, and gave me a briefing. There's a short list of 4. 2 have gone downhill. One is her favorite, and here she lowered her voice as if the venue could hear us. They have a 2-year wait list, which is why it pays to be organized. Then I found the receipt. Tucked into a sleeve at the back, a deposit, an actual deposit, actual money, placed on a date to hold our relationship with the venue. Refundable she was. Quick to say, fully refundable. She's not crazy. The date is rolling. She renews it. The venue coordinator knows her by name. They send each other Christmas cards. My mother has a 26-year relationship with a wedding venue, and I have never had a relationship last 26 months. I ran one small experiment, which I regret. At Sunday dinner, I mentioned, fabricated entirely, that a coworker had gotten engaged at a vineyard and that it had seemed kind of nice. I said maybe 15 words total. By Thursday, the binder had a new tab. Vineyards. 4 printouts, driving distances noted, 1 flagged tent required if October. She'd also, and I only discovered this later, emailed her venue coordinator to ask, and I quote from the printed reply in the binder, purely hypothetically. How we'd feel about an outdoor ceremony, our relationship with the venue. Here's the thing I've made peace with, and it's why this story doesn't end with an intervention. My mom is not pressuring me. In 26 years, she has never once asked when I'm getting married, never nudged me about dating, never made me feel behind. All the pressure a mother could generate, every ounce of it has been channeled into the binder instead. The binder absorbs it like a lightning rod. Other people's mothers ask pointed questions at Thanksgiving. Mine quietly reprices centerpieces and leaves me completely alone. As coping mechanisms go, it might be the most functional one in our entire family, so the binder lives in the closet, growing at its geological pace. Every year, the flowers get repriced. Every year, the deposit rolls over. And if I ever do get married, it will be, logistically speaking, the most flawlessly executed event in the history of our family. 26 years of planning, 2-year waitlist pre-cleared, tent contingency in place. And if I never do, then my mother will simply keep planning it forever, entirely content, because the wedding was never really the point. The readiness was the point. That story ends there. A 26-year wedding binder for a wedding with no groom, no date, and a standing relationship with a venue coordinator is either the most patient act of love ever recorded or the longest-running hobby in maternal history, and honestly, it's probably both. Speaking of family communication systems that have evolved beyond anyone's control, our next story concerns a family of 7 people who somehow maintain 6 group chats, every single one of which exists to exclude somebody. My family has 7 members across 3 households: my parents, me and my husband, my brother and his wife, and my grandma. 7 people. A number small enough that you could, in theory, put everyone in one room, or, dare to dream, 1 group chat. We have 6 group chats. I need to walk you through the org chart because the architecture is genuinely impressive. There's the main chat, called Family, which contains everyone and is therefore useless. Nothing real is ever said in Family. It's all birthday wishes and photos of food. It's the lobby, the public square, the place where information goes to be official. Anything actually important has already happened somewhere else, in one of the other 5. There's Family No Grandma, which exists, I want to be fair, for benign reasons, planning Grandma's surprise birthday, coordinating her Christmas gift. That's how it started. It has since become the place where we discuss anything we'd rather Grandma not weigh in on, which over time has expanded to include most subjects because Grandma weighs in like a hurricane weighs in on a coastline. There's siblings, just me and my brother, which is mostly memes and the occasional strategic alliance. There's the kids, which is me, my brother, and our spouses. No parents, where the actual holiday logistics get pre-negotiated before being presented in. Family, a spontaneous consensus. There's mom damage control, which is me, my brother, and my dad. I should not have to explain what it's for, and in its defense, it has prevented at least 3 wars. And then there's the 6th one. The 6th one is my favorite. Last spring, my aunt, my mom's sister, technically not even one of the 7, a consultant brought in from outside the org decided that the family had a communication problem, and that the solution was to consolidate the chats. Streamline. 1 family, 1 chat. And to organize this consolidation, she created, I promise this is true, a new group chat. A 7th entity, called One Chat Project, dedicated to discussing the merger of the other 6. It excluded Grandma. The Oni Chat Project chat is still active a year later. The merger has not happened. The merger will never happen. Instead, Owen Chat Project has itself become load-bearing. It's where we now discuss chat policy like a tiny parliament, and my aunt posts in it quarterly. With a renewed proposal and a bulleted list, and we all react with thumbs ups and nothing changes. The committee to reduce the number of committees has become a permanent committee. My dad calls it that openly, and Mom Damage Control, which is the only chat where it's safe to say, I ran the experiment, eventually, the obvious one. I sat down one evening and mapped it all out, who was in what each chat was actually for versus what it claimed to be for, and I realized the 6 chats weren't a communication problem at all. They were a pressure system. Every family has things that can't be said to everyone, and every family builds channels for those things. Side conversations at the sink, phone calls after. Dinner, looks exchanged across tables. We just digitized it, made it searchable, given it names and icons. The 6 chats are simply the natural shape of our family, rendered in software. Grandma, for the record, is not naive about this. I found out recently, through siblings, obviously, that she and my mom have their own chat, just the 2 of them, where Grandma comments freely on all of us. It's called, and I cannot improve on this, The Girls. 7 people. At last count with, the girls confirmed, 7 chats. We have achieved a perfect 1-to-1 ratio of humans to group chats, and I've come to believe this is what equilibrium looks like. The system isn't broken. The system, horrifyingly, works. That story ends there. 6 group chats for 7 people, plus a 7th chat created specifically to discuss merging the other 6, is the kind of organizational structure that would get a corporation investigated. But for a family, it might genuinely be the most honest communication system ever built. Everyone gets a room where they can be discussed. Democracy at its finest. Speaking of quiet domestic bookkeeping, our next story involves a mother-in-law, a pantry whiteboard, and the slow realization that the Tupperware was never really a gift. When I married into my husband's family, I was warned about exactly one thing. Not politics, not old feuds, nothing dramatic. My husband, on the drive to my first family dinner, said, with the gravity of a man briefing a diplomat, "Whatever happens tonight, if his mother sends you home with food, you have to bring the container back." I laughed. He did not laugh. I should have paid attention to that. Dinner was wonderful. My mother-in-law is a genuinely spectacular cook, and she sent us home, as she sends everyone home, with leftovers, beef stew and a rectangular container with a blue lid. I put it in our fridge, we ate the stew over the next few days, the container went through the dishwasher, and then it did what containers do in every household on Earth. It dissolved into the general container population of our kitchen cabinet, indistinguishable from its brothers and sisters, its origin forgotten. 3 weeks later, at the next family dinner, my mother-in-law asked, lightly, so lightly, while serving the salad, whether we still had her rectangular one with the blue lid, and the table went quiet, not dramatically quiet. Just a small dip in air pressure, a half second where my husband's fork paused, and his sister looked at me with what I now recognize was compassion. I said I'd bring it back, and I did, the following week when we dropped by. And as I handed it over, feeling good about myself, I watched my mother-in-law walk to the pantry, open the door, and make a small motion on the inside wall. A wiping motion, followed by a writing motion. There is a whiteboard inside the pantry door. I've since seen it up close. I made an excuse about looking for napkins at Thanksgiving, and I stood in that pantry and studied it like a stolen document. It is a grid. Down the left side, the names of every member of the family, plus, I noted with a chill, a row for neighbors as a category. Across the top, OUT, BACK, and a third column with no header that contains only symbols whose meaning I still do not fully understand. Dots, mostly, and 1. Asterisk next to her brother-in-law's name that has, according to my husband, been there since roughly 2019. Next to my name, at the time of my Thanksgiving reconnaissance, it said 3, -3. I had, at that moment, and I went home and counted, exactly 3 of her containers in my cabinet. The ledger was accurate to the container. She had never said a word. There were no reminders, no complaints. Just the quiet arithmetic in the pantry, accumulating, the way glaciers accumulate, and the occasional feather-light dinner table question. Do you still have my round one? Deployed, I now understand, not to retrieve the container, but to signal that the books were being kept. Here's where I made my mistake, and I own it. I tried to zero out the account. I gathered all 3 containers, washed them until they gleamed, and returned them in a single dramatic transaction at Sunday dinner. I believe, in retrospect, this was received the way a bank receives a customer closing an account. Technically fine, faintly insulting. Because here's what I hadn't understood yet. What took me 2 more years to understand, the containers are not supposed to go to 0. The containers are the relationship. An outstanding container means another visit, another dinner, another reason to stop by. When she loads you up with food in her containers, she is extending credit. She is investing in your return. My sister-in-law, who has been playing this game her whole life, maintains a rolling balance of exactly 2 containers at all times, like a minimum account. Balance, and she is, not coincidentally, the favorite. So now I run a balance too. Always 1 or 2 out, never more than 3, never enough to earn the asterisk, whatever the asterisk means. I bring one back, she sends me home with another, the whiteboard updates, the books stay open, and every few weeks the little blue-lidded ambassadors travel. Between our houses carrying stew and soup, and underneath all of it, the ongoing negotiation of how much we belong to each other. Last month, she sent us home with lasagna in the rectangular one, the original, the blue lid, the container where it all began, and as she handed it to me, she said, "No rush." And I understood, finally, completely, that no rush is the warmest thing in her entire vocabulary. It means you'll be back. It's on the board. That story ends there. A secret pantry ledger tracking the whereabouts of every container in a 15-mile radius sounds like surveillance, but a balance that's never meant to reach. 0 might be the most honest accounting a family ever devised. Somewhere in that pantry, an asterisk waits for an explanation that will probably never come, and the brother-in-law it belongs to should, by all accounts, be very worried. Staying in the kitchen for a moment, our next story is about a grandmother whose famous recipes have been requested for decades and faithfully shared every single time, with one small adjustment. My grandma is the undisputed cook of our family. Her lemon cake has ended arguments. Her Sunday gravy has been transported across state lines, packed in ice like a donor organ. And for as long as anyone can remember, she has been generous with her recipes. Ask, and she'll write it out for you on a card in her looping handwriting, usually with a little note at the top like, "So easy." Here's the thing. The recipes don't work. Not dramatically. That's what took us so long to figure out. If her recipes produce disasters, someone would have said something in the 1990s. Instead, they produce a version of the dish that's about 85% right. Recognizable, pleasant, and mysteriously hollow, like hearing a cover band. Play a song you love? My mom spent literal years believing she just had colder hands than Grandma, which is a thing Grandma once suggested, and my mother accepted as science. The first time I suspected, I was making the lemon cake from my card at her house while she was in the room. I measured the vanilla, 1 teaspoon per the card, and from across the kitchen, without looking up from her crossword, she said, "That's not enough vanilla." I checked the card, her handwriting, 1 teaspoon. When I pointed this out, she looked at the card like she'd never seen it before in her life and said, "Well, cards are a starting point." The second clue came from my aunt, who once watched Grandma make the famous gravy start to finish, taking notes like a courtroom stenographer. At no point did Grandma consult a recipe, and at 3 separate points she added things that appear on no card ever issued, including something from an unlabeled jar that my Aunt swears Grandma positioned her body to block, the way a card player guards a hand. So my cousin and I ran the experiment. At Christmas, we made Grandma's own lemon cake from Grandma's own card, and set a slice next to a slice of the cake Grandma brought, same recipe allegedly. Side by side, they were cousins at best. Hers was deeper, warmer, almost floral. Ours tasted like a very good photocopy. We asked her to try both and explain the difference, and she took one bite of each, thought about it, and delivered the single greatest non-confession in our family's history. You must have opened the oven too early. Over the years, the family has assembled a working list of the discrepancies. The cinnamon in her apple crumble is almost certainly not cinnamon, or not only cinnamon. The pie crust card says butter, multiple witnesses have seen lard. The gravy has a bay leaf count that changes depending on who she's talking to. 2, 3, or you'll know. My uncle believes there's citrus zest in the meatballs. He has believed this, loudly, for 11 years. She has neither confirmed nor denied, which for her is practically a signed statement. The strangest part is that she's not protecting a business. There's no bakery, no cookbook deal, no rivalry. As far as anyone can tell, she simply cannot bring herself to hand over the last 15% of anything. My mom's theory is that it's insurance. As long as nobody's version tastes quite right, everybody still comes to her table. And every holiday, all of us show up, cards in our recipe boxes at home, and eat the real versions of dishes we technically know how to make. And it's wonderful, and nobody says a word. Last spring, she was in the hospital for a few days. She's fine. And she told my mother, in a quiet moment, that everything important is written down in the blue tin. The family has located the blue tin. Nobody has opened it. There is a genuine, unspoken belief that it's either the true recipes or 50 more decoys, and honestly, both possibilities feel equally like her. That story ends there. A woman running a decades-long misinformation campaign against her own descendants, purely so her cooking stays undefeated, is honestly a masterclass in soft power. The blue tin is out there, and one day someone's going to open it, and I genuinely don't know if they'll find treasure or one card that says colder hands. From secrets in the kitchen to secrets in the wrapping paper, our next story tracks a single object on its long, strange journey through one family's gift-giving economy. Every family has rules about gifts. Ours has a bowl. It started, as best as anyone can reconstruct, about 9 years ago, when my aunt gave my mother a decorative ceramic serving bowl for her birthday. How do I describe this bowl? It's large, it's heavy. It is aggressively turquoise, with a pattern around the rim that different family members have described as waves, feathers, and teeth. It is the kind of object you cannot throw away, because it's clearly expensive, and cannot display, because it's clearly cursed. My mother thanked my aunt, displayed the bowl for the socially required 6 months, and then, the following Christmas, wrapped it beautifully and gave it to my grandmother. Now, my mother maintains, to this day, that this was not laziness. It was, in her words, matchmaking. She genuinely believed Grandma's sideboard was where the bowl belonged, and in her defense, everyone privately agreed the bowl looked slightly more at home. There, the way a strange painting looks slightly more at home in a hotel, Grandma kept it for a year. Then my cousin got married, and among the wedding gifts, in paper so elegant it should have been a warning, was the bowl. That's when the family, quietly, without ever holding a meeting about it, understood what we had. The bowl was no longer a gift. The bowl was a tradition. Possibly a test. It began to move through the family the way a championship belt moves through boxing. held, defended, and eventually, inevitably, passed on. Housewarmings, retirements. A graduation, once, which even the family agreed was a low blow. My nephew was 22 and did not own a table. The rules, never written and never spoken, are perfectly understood by all. You must express delight upon receiving the bowl. You must keep it a minimum of 1 season. You may not give it back to the person who gave it to you. There was an incident in year 5, and the offender, my uncle, is still spoken of the way sports. Fans speak of a player who left for a rival team, and you must never ever acknowledge that the bowl is the bowl. I started keeping a private log of the bowl's movements about 4 years ago because I realized I was witnessing something science should know about. By my count, the bowl has changed hands 11 times. It has lived in 4 states. It flew, checked in bubble wrap inside a suitcase, to my sister's place in Denver and back. Its dollar per mile efficiency now rivals a rental car. And then, this past Christmas, the perfect thing happened. The thing the log was always waiting for. My aunt, the original giver, the woman who started the entire cycle 9 years ago, and we're all fairly sure the only family member who genuinely liked the bowl, opened a large, heavy, beautifully wrapped box and lifted out the bowl. The room held its breath. 11 transfers, 9 years, 4 states, 1 suitcase, and the bowl had come home, delivered by my brother-in-law who married in 3 years ago and had absolutely no idea what he was holding. He just thought it matched her kitchen. My aunt looked at that bowl for a long, long moment. And then she pressed her hand to her chest and said, "I've always wanted one like this," and the entire family made eye contact with the entire family, and nobody said a single word. It's on her sideboard now, displayed, loved, possibly, at last. That story's over. 9 years of ceramic diplomacy, 11 silent handoffs, and the object of the whole quiet conspiracy lands back with the one person on Earth glad to see it. Either the most perfect accident in gift-giving history, or my aunt has been playing a much longer game than any of us, and honestly, I no longer rule that out. Speaking of the official family record and who exactly gets to keep it, our next story involves a mother whose memories of family events improve measurably with every retelling. My mom is the keeper of our family stories, in a sense that she tells them the most, at every gathering, to every new boyfriend, girlfriend, neighbor, and dental professional. And at some point in the last decade, the family noticed something. The stories are getting better, not in the telling, in the facts. The facts are getting better. The flagship example is the fishing trip. In 2011, my dad and my brother went on a fishing trip, got rained on, caught nothing, and came home a day early. That is the entire true story. I was there for the original telling. It was 2 sentences long and mostly about the motel. In my mother's current version, the 2026 release, if you will, that same trip now features a storm that came out of nowhere, like something biblical. A boat that nearly went over twice, a heroic stranger named Gus, who my brother has repeatedly confirmed does not exist, and a final line where my dad looks at my brother and says, "At least we're alive," which my dad denies with the weariness of a man who has been denying it for years. The rain is real. Everything else accreted, layer by layer, telling by telling, like a pearl. The mechanics are subtle. She never invents a story outright, she renovates. Each retelling adds one small improvement, a detail sharpened here, a quote upgraded there, weather intensified about 15% per year. Compound interest, but for anecdotes. Give her a decade and a damp afternoon becomes the perfect storm. Give her 2, and I assume Gus gets a boat named after him. For a while, the family fact-checked her in real time. This was a mistake. If you say, "Mom, there was no boat, you fished off a dock," she doesn't argue. She pauses, accepts the note like a director in an edit bay, and the next. Version incorporates the dock while keeping the storm. The story doesn't get truer, it gets more durable. My brother calls it patching the canon. And it's not just her own stories. This is the part that finally made me start writing things down. She edits yours. I told her a perfectly ordinary story about locking myself out of my apartment, waited 40 minutes, the maintenance guy let me in, the end. 8 months later at Easter, I heard my own story told back to me, except now I'd climbed a fire escape. A neighbor had called out encouragement from a window, and the maintenance man had said, and I quote, "You've got guts, kid. No part of my life has ever resembled this. It is, I admit, a better story." That's the problem. There are always better stories. The experiment, when I finally ran it, was simple. I planted a story, told her something mildly interesting with 3 checkable details, and then just waited, tracking it like a tagged bird. First retelling 2 weeks later, details intact, 1 adjective added. Second, a month on, the location had moved somewhere more scenic. By the 4th retelling, at Thanksgiving, my 20-minute wait at the DMV had become nearly 3 hours, and I had apparently organized the whole line. Which, I want to be very clear, is not a thing that happened or a thing that can happen at a DMV. Here's the landing, though. 2 years ago, at my grandfather's memorial, my mom got up and told stories about him for 10 straight minutes, and they were, every one of them, upgraded. Shinier than life, warmer than the facts. And looking around that room at people laughing and crying at slightly fictional versions of a real man, I understood the whole operation at last. She's not lying, she's polishing, she hands every memory back better than she found it. Nobody fact-checks her anymore. We just listen, and afterward my brother leans over and quietly tells me the patch notes. That story ends there. A woman running a 1-person remaster studio on the family archives, upgrading everyone's memories about 15% per year, is honestly less a flaw and more a public service with a loose relationship to sourcing. Somewhere out there, Gus is real, and I hope he knows what he means to us. From the family record to the family radar, our next story concerns an aunt who has never let a relative travel anywhere without filing what can only be. Described as a flight plan, my aunt requires itineraries, not requests, requires. If anyone in our family is going anywhere further than the grocery store, she expects to know when you're leaving, which route you're taking, where you're staying, and when you'll confirm your safe arrival. She has held this post, entirely self-appointed, for at least 20 years. A normal exchange with a normal relative before a trip goes, "Have fun, text me a picture." An exchange with my aunt is a debrief. When my husband and I drove 4 hours to a wedding last fall, she called 3 days before. She calls, always, because texts hide things, and conducted what I can only call an intake interview. Which highway? Which exits? Had I checked the weather and not on my phone on the actual news? The name of the hotel, and then, memorably, the hotel's cross street, which I did not know, which audibly cost me credibility. She maintains records. This is confirmed. There is a spiral notebook, burgundy, thick, at least a decade old, where every family trip is logged in her small, neat handwriting. Departure dates, license plates, the phone numbers of hotels that no longer exist. My cousin once saw an entry from 2016 that read, in its entirety, Michael. Cleveland. Against my advice, the check-in protocol is sacred. You must call upon arrival, not when you've settled in. Upon arrival, ideally from the parking lot, engine still ticking. Failed to check in within the grace period, which is roughly 45 minutes and shrinks with weather, and the escalation ladder activates. Your phone, your spouse's phone, the hotel front desk, the front desk. My brother missed his window once in 2019. His phone died and was located via a front desk transfer to his room, where he took a 4-minute callback. Consisted mostly of silence and one long exhale. Naturally, I eventually asked the question you're asking, has anything ever actually happened? Has 20 years of surveillance ever caught anything? And the family answer, delivered with reverence, is once. My uncle's flight was cancelled while he was mid-air on the first leg, stranding him with a dead phone in an airport in Charlotte. By the time he found a charter, my aunt had already rebooked him on another airline, reserved an airport hotel as backup, and called ahead to his destination. To move his rental car from her kitchen, using the itinerary she had demanded and he had grudgingly provided, he landed to find his entire evening repaired. She has never once brought it up herself, which is the most terrifying display of power I've ever witnessed. So the family runs the experiment in reverse now. We comply. All of us. Grown adults with careers and mortgages, texting a woman in her 60s, our highway numbers. Because the math is undeniable, the cost is a 10-minute intake call, and the payout, once a decade, is a guardian angel with a burgundy notebook who can reroute your life from a landline. She's slowing down a little these days, and my cousin recently asked, delicately, whether she'd ever consider a shared location app, which does everything. Her notebook does, automatically, in real time. She considered it the way a master carpenter considers a glue gun, and said, "And what happens when the phones go down?" No one had an answer. The notebook abides. That story's over. 20 years of unpaid air traffic control for a family that never crashes, justified in full by one flawless rescue she's too powerful to even mention. Honestly, every family should be so lucky. Somewhere in that burgundy notebook, we are all, permanently, against her advice. And speaking of family positions that are held for decades and defended in total silence, our final story before the midpoint takes us to the potluck table, where two women have been fighting the same battle since 2009 without either of them ever acknowledging that a war is on. My Aunt Renee and my Aunt Carol are married to two brothers, my uncles, and for going on 17 years, both of them have brought green bean casserole to every single family gathering, both of them, every gathering. Two large, nearly identical dishes of green bean casserole placed on the same table, usually, and I need you to understand this is the participants' own doing at opposite ends like rival embassies. Nobody knows exactly how it started. The leading theory involves Thanksgiving 2009, when one of them, accounts differ, loyalties determine the telling, was asked to bring the casserole, and the other one also brought it as a backup, and the first one interpreted the backup as a review. That's it. That's the entire origin. Two casseroles in 2009, and a Cold War that has outlasted 3 presidencies. The rules of engagement are ironclad. Neither woman has ever, in 17 years, commented on the other's casserole, not one word. They compliment each other's hair, their desserts, their children. The casseroles exist in a separate diplomatic dimension where the other's dish is simply never perceived. My uncle swears his wife has never once said Carol's name and the word casserole in the same sentence, and he's been listening for it, he says, the way you listen for a smoke alarm chirp. But the war is real, and it is fought through refinement. Renee went through a crispy shallot period around 2013 that people still talk about. Carol answered, 2 gatherings later, with a from-scratch mushroom cream sauce that made my grandfather briefly emotional. Renee found artisanal green beans at a farmer's market. Carol responded with Gruyere. It's an arms race conducted entirely in side dishes, and the rest of us are the beneficiaries, sitting in the neutral zone, eating remarkably well. Because here's the thing the family figured out early, the scoreboard is the empty dish. Whichever casserole runs out first wins. Nothing is ever said, but both women watch that table like floor traders, and everyone knows. The family, complicit in a way none of us is proud of, has developed strategic eating patterns. My dad takes a scoop of each, every time, exactly equal, and has for a decade. Switzerland in a sweater. My teenage nephew, who fears nothing, once took seconds from only one dish, and the silence that followed had a texture. The closest the war ever came to going hot was Easter 2021, when a well-meaning cousin's new girlfriend, briefed by no one, brought a third green bean. Casserole, the temperature of the room changed. Renee and Carol, who had not exchanged a direct word about casserole in over a decade, made eye contact across the table for what witnesses describe as a full second. The third casserole was received politely, placed in the dead center of the table between the two great powers, and quietly annihilated by the family with the speed of a peacekeeping operation. The girlfriend brought rolls the next year. Someone had clearly spoken to her. No one admits who. Last Thanksgiving, for the first time, both dishes emptied at exactly the same time. My mother may have engineered this. She denies it the way she denies. Moving chess pieces when we were kids, and for one strange, warm moment, Renee and Carol stood side by side at the sink, washing two identical empty dishes. Chatting about everything on earth except the obvious. My cousin has a photo. In it, they're laughing. That story ends there. 17 years, 2 casseroles, 0 acknowledgements, and an entire extended family holding formation around a conflict that produces nothing but excellent. Side dishes. Honestly, as wars go, it's the best one I've ever been drafted into. May it never end, and may no one ever bring a third dish again. Moving from the table to the front door, our next story measures the single longest recurring event on our family's calendar: my father saying goodbye. My dad cannot leave a family gathering in under 45 minutes. I don't mean he lingers. I mean that goodbye, for my father, is not a word but a journey. A multi-stage ceremonial withdrawal with its own phases, stations, and customs performed. Identically at every family event since at least the late 90s. Phase 1 is the announcement. At some point in the evening, early, always suspiciously early, my dad will slap his knees, stand up, and declare, "Well, we should get going." This means nothing. Everyone knows it means nothing. My mother does not even look up. The announcement is not a departure. It's a change of state, like water starting to think about boiling. He will then stand, holding his keys as a prop, and have his longest conversation of the entire evening. Phase 2 is the doorway summit. 20 minutes post-announcement, the party migrates to the front hallway, where my father, coat now on, which the family recognizes as an escalation, but not. A commitment conducts a full review of topics that somehow never came up during the previous 4 hours. This is where the real business of the family gets done. Job changes are announced in doorways, health updates, the plan for Grandma's birthday. My sister told the family she was pregnant during a doorway summit, and everyone agreed afterward it was the correct venue. Phase 3, the driveway seminar, is where guests of other families would assume the goodbye is concluding. Ours knows it's merely gone outdoors. Topics turn seasonal and mechanical, the state of everyone's tires, a gutter situation, whatever tree is doing something. My uncle and my dad once stood next to a running car, running, engine on, my mother inside it, for 25 additional minutes discussing a fence that belonged to neither of them. The fence, I want to note, belonged to a man none of us has ever met. I got curious enough to start timing it discreetly over the course of a year. The data is real, and it is spectacular. Average goodbye, measured from announcement to wheels actually moving, 51 minutes. Record, 1 hour and 20 minutes, set at a 4th of July when the goodbye outlasted the fireworks. And once, this is the family's Everest, my parents stopped by for a minute to drop off a ladder, stayed 37 minutes total, and the goodbye portion of that visit ran 50 minutes. The farewell was longer than the event. The math should be impossible. He does it about twice a year. In the experiment, because there had to be one last summer, I tried to engineer a fast exit. I brought the leftovers to the door pre-bagged, warmed up the conversation topics early like a good opening act, and had my dad's coat draped over the banister. By 8 o'clock, he was announced, coded, and door adjacent by 8:10. And then, on the porch, unencumbered by any remaining task, my father delivered, from memory unprompted, a 30-minute history of a road trip he took in. 1987, including a gas station that no longer exists, and, he was careful to specify, wouldn't be on the same road anymore anyway. We crossed the 50-minute line at 9002. The system cannot be optimized. The goodbye expands to fill all available freedom. The landing came at my niece's graduation party this spring. Out-of-town relatives, people we see once every few years, and my dad in absolute peak form. Announcement at 6040, actual departure at 8005, a personal. Top 5 performance. And my niece, 18, keys to her whole life in her hand, hugged me at the door for a solid 5 minutes, telling me one more thing, and then another, and then one more. And over her shoulder, I watched my dad watching her, proud, misty, checking his watch not to leave but to time her. It's hereditary. The goodbye tour has an air. That story ends there. A man who has spent, by conservative estimate, 6 full weeks of his life saying goodbye in driveways, and whose farewells have now outlived a gas station. Honestly, there are worse monuments, and our family, leaving, is just a word for the best part of the visit. Staying with fathers and their domains, our next story concerns the small plastic box on my parents' wall and the man who guards it like the last ember of a sacred fire. My dad controls the thermostat the way central banks control interest rates, with total authority, zero transparency, and a deep conviction that everyone else's input would destroy civilization. The temperature in my parents' house is 68 degrees. It has been 68 degrees since the Clinton administration. It will be 68 degrees when the sun swallows the earth, which my father would describe as, finally, some free heat. Growing up, we understood the thermostat as a display, not a control. It showed you what the temperature was. The idea that you might change it was a category error, like trying to adjust the moon. My dad possesses a sense for thermostat tampering that borders on the paranormal. You could ease that dial up 2 degrees with the delicacy of a safecracker, and within the hour he'd drift through the room, pause, not even look at the wall. Just pause, like a deer scenting something, and correct it on his way out. No comment, no accusation. The system self-heals. The countermeasures evolved, of course. My mother, a patient woman playing an eternal game, mastered the 2-phase adjustment, 1 degree at 2 p.m., a 2nd degree at 4, on the theory that no single change crossed his detection threshold. It worked for years, we think, although my brother maintains that Dad knew the whole time and tolerated it, which would honestly be more unsettling. The kids' approach was blunter, the oven method. You can't get in trouble for baking. 68 degrees with cookies in the oven is a different 68 degrees. My sister baked her way through the winter of 2008 like a woman possessed. We gained 4 pounds and 2 degrees. Then came the escalation nobody forgets, the lockbox. Yes, they make clear plastic lockable covers for thermostats, marketed, I have since learned, to landlords and the fathers of my father's exact temperament. It appeared one November morning without announcement or ceremony. A small transparent shrine bolted over the dial. My mother looked at it for a long moment and said nothing, which in her language was a declaration the equal of his. The lockbox era lasted 4 months, ending abruptly when Dad himself got cold during a January cold snap and had to fetch the key from his sock drawer in front. Of everyone. The box came down that spring. Neither side claims victory, historians disagree. The data point that explains the entire man, it's not about money. We tested this. My brother, as an adult, once offered to pay the difference on the heating bill, calculated it, cash on the table, maybe $9 a month. Dad declined without hesitation. It's not the money, he said, with the gravity of a man revealing his code. It's the principle. The principle has never been further specified. The principle is 68 degrees. These days we're all grown and gone, and visits home have a known dress code. My sister's kids call it Grandpa's House sweaters, a dedicated drawer of them. Right by the door. And last Christmas, mid-visit, I caught my dad in the hallway, alone, quietly nudging the thermostat up to 70 for the grandkids. He saw me see him. Neither of us has ever spoken of it, and if you tell him I told you, I will deny everything. That story's over. 30 years holding the line at 68 degrees on principle, defeated at last, voluntarily, secretly, 2 degrees at a time, by grandchildren. Honestly, it's the only treaty that was ever going to work. The sweaters stay, though. The sweaters are tradition now. Speaking of family systems built on absolute fairness, our next story is about my grandmother's accounting, which is accurate to the penny and has been for 40 years. My grandma has 9 grandchildren, and every single one of us for our entire lives has received birthday and Christmas gifts of exactly equal value. Not roughly equal, not equal in spirit. Equal to the cent, reconciled like a quarterly report because, in my grandmother's moral universe, a $19.99 gift for one grandchild and a $21.50 gift for another is not a rounding error, it's favoritism. And favoritism is how families fall. The rule surfaced early in my childhood in the form of the ledger, a slim checkbook-style register she kept in her purse, in which every gift purchase was recorded with the recipient's initials and the exact price, tax included, tax included. If your cousin's toy came to $24.47 and yours came to $23.89, you did not simply receive your toy. You received your toy and a small Ziploc bag taped inside your birthday card containing 48 cents. I need you to sit with that image the way we all had to. A 7-year-old opening a card and finding, next to Grandma's looping signature, a taped bag of exact change, with a note in pen reading, "Makes it even." No further explanation, ever. The coins weren't a gift, they were a settlement. As we got older, the system only grew more rigorous. Sale prices counted at the price paid, not retail value. My cousin once received a very nice sweater in 6/12 because Grandma had gotten the sweater at 40% off and refused to claim credit for value she hadn't paid. Shipping was a crisis. When online ordering arrived, there was a 2-year period, which the family calls the shipping accords, during which she resolved that. Shipping counted because the money left the account, and the equalization bags briefly got heavier. Gift cards, being denominated, were her happiest era. Honest, she called them, the way a jeweler talks about a flawless stone. The experiment happened at my brother's 18th birthday, when he, a teenager at the peak of teenage courage, told Grandma directly that she really didn't have to do the coins, that nobody was counting, that we all knew she loved us the same. Grandma patted his hand with genuine warmth, thanked him for the thought, and taped 173 inside his card anyway. Someone had cost 173 more that year. To this day, nobody knows who. She protects the ledger sources like a journalist. The landing is the part I didn't see coming. 2 years ago, at Christmas, my oldest cousin, the first of us to have kids of her own, was watching her daughter open a card from great-grandma. And taped inside was a small bag containing 61 cents, 4th generation. The system had automatically extended, without announcement, to the great-grandchildren, the ledger presumably now tracking 11 names in that small precise handwriting. My cousin caught my eye across the room and just held up the bag, and the whole family, all 9 of us equalized children, laughed until it hurt. That story ends there. 40 years, 4 generations, and a purse ledger balancing the books on love to the exact penny. Honestly, most banks should run this clean. None of us ever doubted where we stood with Grandma. We stood at precisely, exactly, provably even. From the family accountant to the family archivist, our next story concerns my uncle, his camera, and the roughly 200 photographs he takes at every single gathering, none of which anyone has ever requested. My Uncle Dave is our documentarian, not by appointment, by force of shutter. At every family event for the past 25 years, Dave has been present in the way weather is present, everywhere, ongoing, and impossible to opt out of. He arrives with a camera bag, positions himself at what he calls the angles, and proceeds to photograph a completely ordinary family dinner with the coverage. Intensity of a state visit. 200 photos is not an exaggeration, it's his floor. Arrivals get photographed, everyone at the door, coat still on, mid-sentence. The food gets photographed, both plated and, mysteriously, mid-preparation. So our family archive contains 25 years of raw casseroles. Conversations get photographed from across the room with a zoom lens, producing thousands of candids of relatives mid-blink, mid-chew, and mid-gesture. Our mouths open, our eyes half shut. A quarter century of a family that appears, in the record, to be perpetually startled. And then, the albums, Dave prints. In an era when every photo on Earth lives and dies on a phone, Dave prints, sleeves, and binds. His house contains, at the last family estimate, over 60 labeled albums. Thanksgiving 2009. Thanksgiving 2009, Volume 2. There are, famously, 14 albums that consist substantially of the same back porch across different years and lighting conditions. My grandparents' porch, documented with the persistence usually reserved for glaciers. Every gathering includes the viewing. After dinner, before dessert, Dave will emerge with 1 or 2 albums. He curates them to the occasion. That's the thing. There's editorial intent. And the family gathers on the couch and flips through slightly blurry versions of gatherings past. For years, I considered this the boring part of the evening. Filler between courses. I would like the record, Dave's record, ideally, to show that I was wrong. Because here's what the family slowly figured out. Dave's archive is the only archive. Nobody else's photos survive. Phones die, get lost, get upgraded, cloud accounts lapse. My sister lost 8 years of pictures to a cracked phone and a lake. Meanwhile, Dave's 60 albums sit on their shelves, sleeved and labeled, patient as bedrock. When my cousin needed a photo of her late father for the memorial table at her wedding, laughing, natural, not posed, the family didn't scroll. Everyone said the same name at the same time. Dave arrived the next day with 9 options, pre-sleeved, sorted by decade. When my grandparents' 50th anniversary needed a slideshow, it was assembled in an afternoon, entirely from the Dave archive. When my grandmother couldn't remember what her mother's kitchen curtains looked like, a small ache, the kind that catches you at odd hours, Dave found them. Background, 1987, slightly out of focus behind a raw casserole. Curtains. She held that photo like a lantern. So the experiment ran itself, in the end. 25 years of the family gently teasing the man with the camera, and the verdict is in, every family has 1,000 moments, and ours is the only one on. The block that kept them. The blinking, chewing, startled versions too. Especially those, honestly. Nobody poses for the photo that ends up mattering. Last gathering, my nephew, 15, glued to a phone like they all are, spent an hour on the couch with summer 1999, asking Dave who everyone was. Dave narrated every page. Both of them missed dessert. The Engels have an apprentice now. That story ends there. 200 unrequested photographs per dinner for a quarter of a century, and it turns out the family joke was load-bearing the entire time, honestly. Archive people are never appreciated in their own era. Somewhere in Volume 2 of Thanksgiving 2009, we are all mid-blink, and we are all, thanks to Dave, permanent. Speaking of family institutions with impressive procedures and predetermined outcomes, our final stretch tonight opens with my mother's annual holiday menu. Survey, democracy's gentlest sham. Every year, in early November, my mother sends the family a survey about the Thanksgiving menu. It began as an email. It is now, I need you to believe me, a proper online form built with real polling software because my brother-in-law works in market. Research and made the mistake, 6 years ago, of showing her the tool. The survey is thorough. 23 questions at last count. It covers the main protein, both potato formats, the stuffing question, inside the bird or out, a genuine schism in our family, cranberry sauce, whole berry, jellied, or the can shape, which is its own constituency, pie rankings submitted in preferential order, and a free response section at the end labeled. Other thoughts, which my cousin once used to write a 4-paragraph case for mac and cheese and now uses annually to write the same case shorter and angrier. Participation is enforced through pure maternal gravity. Reminders go out. Non-voters are called. I just want everyone to feel heard, she says, and she means it, every syllable, with her whole heart. And then she makes the exact same menu she has made since 1994. Turkey, the same turkey, same recipe, brined in the same bucket. Her stuffing, inside the bird, per a family ruling that predates the survey era entirely, both potatoes in the same dishes. The can-shaped cranberry sauce, because Grandpa liked it and some votes outlast the voter, the same 3 pies. The mac and cheese has never once appeared. The results of the survey have never once, in any measurable way, in over a decade of polling, affected a single dish on that table. We know this because, 3 years ago, ham won. It shouldn't have been possible, but the cousins organized, a genuine voting bloc, group chat coordinated, the youth vote mobilized as a prank that got out of. And when my mother's own software tallied the results, ham had beaten turkey, 54% to 46%. The family held its breath. My brother-in-law called it a constitutional crisis. My mother reviewed the results, thanked everyone sincerely for such a great turnout, and served turkey. When Hamblock's floor leader, my cousin, emboldened by numbers, gently raised the outcome at dinner, my mom said, without a flicker of shame, the line that has since gone on a family t-shirt, "The survey isn't about the food, honey." And the thing is, she's right, and we all know she's right, and that's why the survey survives. Because the survey isn't a menu instrument, it's a census. It's how she gets every scattered branch of this family to stop for 10 minutes in November and think about the same table at the same time. The form is the invitation. The turnout is the point. Voting for the mac and cheese is the tradition exactly as much as its annual guaranteed defeat. Last year's survey included a new final question, added quietly at the bottom. Anything new going on that the family should celebrate? And that's how the family learned about a job, an engagement, and a baby. In the response summary, my mother emailed out with the subject line, "Great turnout." This year, the menu, of course, was unchanged. The menu will always be unchanged. Nobody would actually eat the ham. That story's over. A 12-year polling operation with a 100% participation rate and 0% policy impact is honestly the most functional democracy I've ever been a citizen of. See you at the polls in November, mac and cheese in our hearts, turkey on the table forever. Our next story concerns my uncle, a man incapable of letting a single trivial detail pass uncorrected, and the day that superpower finally turned on its owner. My Uncle Pete corrects details, not arguments, details. He has no interest in winning debates or changing minds. His calling is smaller and infinitely more specific. If you say a thing happened on a Tuesday and it happened on a Wednesday, Pete will surface from another conversation from another room, once, audibly from the garage to set the record straight. The corrections are never about anything. That's the art of it. Tell a story about the time the dog jumped in the lake and ruined a barbecue, and Pete will let the dog, the lake, and the ruined barbecue pass without comment. But say it happened in the summer of 2010 and he'll materialize at your elbow, 2011. The Hendersons still had the boat. The story means nothing to him. The year is sacred. He'll supply corrections to stories he wasn't present for, using a private methodology of cross-references. Whose car existed yet? Which house had which roof? The eternal Henderson vote that honestly would impress an archivist if it were ever pointed at anything that mattered. Family lore holds decades of casualties. My mother no longer tells her honeymoon story in his presence because the correction, it concerns a ferry schedule, arrives at the same beat every time, like a liturgical response. My grandfather, before he passed, developed the countermeasure of front-loading disclaimers. This was sometime in the 80s, PETE, the exact year is not important, which worked 0 times because to Pete, the exact year is the only important thing, and a disclaimer is just a confession that a correction is. Available. We tested him, of course. My brother and I, home one Christmas, salted a story with 3 deliberate errors. A wrong month, a wrong car, and a wrong price of gas, which we considered. Our masterstroke. Pete caught the month before the sentence finished. The car took him 4 minutes, during which we watched him visibly running background checks mid-conversation. The gas price came at 10 p.m. via text with a link. We had told the story at lunch, and then 2 years ago, the universe balanced its ledger. The family planned a surprise party for Pete's 60th. Weeks of secrecy, a rented hall, cousins flying in, and the invitation, sent to everyone but him, listed the party for Saturday the 14th. Except his birthday is the 12th, and someone, as a cover story, told Pete the family was gathering for a little birthday dinner on the 14th, and Pete, being Pete, corrected it. My birthday's the 12th. If people are coming for my birthday, it should be the 12th. I'll book the restaurant. And he did. He booked a restaurant for himself on the actual date and began inviting people to it, systematically dismantling his own surprise party with the relentless precision of a man who simply could not let a wrong date stand. The family watched their secret operation collapse in real time, outmaneuvered not by suspicion, but by accuracy. He never suspected a thing. He was just correcting. They merged the events in the end. The hall was moved, the restaurant canceled, and when 60 people yelled "surprise" at Pete on the 12th, the first words out of his mouth before "thank you" before "wow" were, and 60 witnesses will confirm this. See the 12th. That's what I said. That story ends there. A man so committed to the historical record that he fact-checked his way out of his own surprise party and then took the surprise as vindication. Honestly. You can't punish someone like that. You can only love him and get the Henderson boats dates right. Speaking of men with unshakable diagnostic confidence, our next story is about my father's porch, my family's cars, and the fan belt of 1998. My dad diagnoses cars by sound, from the porch. You pull into my parents' driveway, and before you've got your seatbelt off, he's cocked his head at an angle the family calls the listening, and by the time you reach the door, he has a verdict. Hear that ticking? Valves. That whine when you backed off? Bearings going. The car in question is usually fine. The car is almost always fine. The diagnoses come with a mandatory referral. Dad doesn't fix cars himself. That's the beautiful part. He refers you to his guy, a mechanic named Sal whose shop is 40 minutes away, past 2. Perfectly good mechanics, and whose chief qualification, as far as 3 decades of evidence shows, is that he once agreed with my father about something. Whether Sal is even still practicing is a live question in the family. My sister believes Sal may have retired in 2019. Nobody has told Dad. Nobody will be the one to tell Dad. The origin of all this confidence is a single, documented event, the fan belt of 1998. The story is true. I've verified it with my mother, who was there and gains nothing from the telling. My parents were leaving for a road trip. Dad paused with one foot in the car, said, "That belt's about to go." Over my mother's objections, drove it to Sal. First, and the belt, upon inspection, was indeed cracked and near failure. That's it. That's the whole miracle. One fan belt, one correct call 28 years ago, and a diagnostic career was born that no volume of subsequent misses has ever dented. The fan belt is cited the way nations cite founding documents. Ask him about the 100 wrong calls since, and he will nod thoughtfully and say, "You weren't there in 98. The scorecard, because of course I've kept one, quietly for 6 years, in that span my father has diagnosed, from the porch, 11 imminent transmission, failures, 6 bearings, 4 exhaust leaks, 1 electrical gremlin, they're the worst, and a wheel he described as thinking about coming off. Of these 22 calls, the correct total is 1. A genuinely failing wheel bearing on my cousin's hatchback, which, I must report honestly, he did catch from 30 feet away, mid-conversation, and which has now joined the fan belt in the founding canon. The hit rate is 4.5%. The confidence is 100. The gap between those numbers is where my father lives, on the porch, listening. The landing is that none of us would trade it. Because here's what the porch diagnostics actually are, decoded. He can't ask his adult kids to stay longer, but he can find something wrong with the car and checking it takes 20 minutes, and there's coffee on. Every "let Sal look at Dad" is "don't leave yet" in the only dialect he's fluent in. My brother figured this out years ago, and now, pulling in, he'll roll down the window and say, "Dad, it's making a noise. Listen," to a car that is making no noise whatsoever, and my father's entire face opens like a garage door in spring. That story's over. 28 years of porch-based automotive medicine running on one fan belt and a 4% hit rate. Honestly, most oracles have worse records and none of them keep the coffee on. Long may the listening continue, and may no one ever confirm what happened to Sal. From the driveway to the dining room, our next story concerns the seating chart at my grandmother's table, a document that does not exist, has never existed, and is enforced absolutely. My grandma seats 22 people at every holiday without ever writing anything down, according to a plan that lives entirely in her head and has the force of constitutional law. There are no place cards. There is no chart on the wall. You simply enter the dining room, and Grandma, from the kitchen doorway, orchestrates with small motions of a wooden spoon. "You're by the window, sweetheart." And somehow, every year, 22 people land in their exact assigned positions like starlings settling onto a wire. The logic of the assignments is real, but only partially decodable, like weather. Feuding second cousins are kept at diagonal distances. Talkers are load balanced. You will never find two of the family's 4 big talkers adjacent, because that, Grandma once let slip, wastes them. My uncle with the laugh sits mid-table, acoustically central. New boyfriends and girlfriends are placed directly across from Grandma, not beside, across in the interview seat for observation. Placement next to Grandma herself is the family's supreme honor and cannot be lobbied for, it is bestowed. And then there's the children's table. Every family has one. Ours is distinguished by the fact that promotion off of it is entirely at Grandma's discretion, follows no known criteria, and has stranded my cousin Marcus there for what is now his 34th year of life. Marcus is a grown man. Marcus has a mortgage, a wife, who was promoted to the adult table 4 years ago, alone, in a decision the family still debates in whispers, and a corner seat between a 9-year-old and a booster chair. Every year, someone gently raises the Marcus question, and every year Grandma says only, "There's a system," and every year the system does not disclose itself. And Marcus passes the gravy to a 4th grader. The experiment was attempted exactly once by my brother 6 years ago, who swapped 2 name-free, chart-free, theoretically unassigned seats before dinner. Just to see what would happen. What happened was that Grandma entered the dining room, stopped, full stop, spoon lowered, the room quieting the way a forest quiets, surveyed the table for 3 seconds, and then reseated 11 people. 11. One unauthorized swap, and she rebalanced half the table on the spot, moving relatives like a chess master restoring a position from memory until whatever invisible equilibrium she maintains was restored. Then dinner proceeded, flawless as always. My brother never did it again. Some forces you test once. The landing came last Thanksgiving, when Marcus 34, a veteran of a quarter century at the small table, arrived carrying a casserole he'd made himself, unprompted, from scratch. Grandma met him at the door, looked at the dish, looked at him, and said, "You're by the window, sweetheart," the adult table. The room actually applauded. Marcus told me later he has no idea if the casserole was the criteria and that he intends to bring one every year forever, like rent. That story ends there. A 22-seat seating algorithm running for decades on pure maternal RAM, with promotion criteria known only to the architect. Honestly, most companies. Org charts should work half as well. Somewhere at that table, there's a system, and the system is love. And also the system keeps the talkers apart, because love has limits. Speaking of family members with a broadcast schedule, our next story concerns my father-in-law and the weather, which he delivers to the entire family. Personally, whether requested or not, my father-in-law is the family's weather service. Not a man who mentions the weather, a full-service meteorological agency with one employee and a coverage area defined as any place any relative currently is, or intends to be. If you're in this family and you are planning to drive, fly, or in certain seasons walk somewhere, you will receive the briefing. The briefing arrives by phone call, never text. Like all the great men of his generation, he believes texts are where information goes to be ignored, and it arrives with lead time. Driving to see them on a Saturday? The first call lands Wednesday. Just looking ahead at your Saturday, there's a system coming through Friday night. A system. Everything is a system. By Friday, there will have been 2 update calls, tracking the system the way networks track elections, and on Saturday morning, as you're loading the car for a 50-minute drive and light drizzle, the final briefing, conditions, timing, and the route advisory. There is always a route advisory. He has opinions about roads he has not driven in 20 years, and he deploys them with the confidence of a man reading from radar only he can see. The crown jewel of the operation is flight tracking. When any relative flies, my father-in-law tracks the flight, gate to gate, live, an open laptop, and a level of vigilance the FAA reserves for its busiest corridors. He calls my wife when her plane takes off. She is on the plane. He knows she's on the plane. The call goes to voicemail, where he narrates milestones. You're over Ohio now. Good tailwind. So that she lands to a 6-part audio documentary of a flight she was present for. Once, her connection was tight, and he'd already researched the gates. You land at B12, you leave from B4, you'll make it, don't stop for coffee. She made it. She did not stop for coffee. She says to this day she could feel him watching the little plane icon the whole way. For years, the family treated the briefings the way you treat any weather. Background noise, gently mocked, waited out. The group chat has a running gag where someone posts a photo of clear blue skies captioned "the system." His own wife answers his forecast with, "Okay, Dan," a 2-word phrase containing 40 years of marriage. And then came the ice storm. 2 years ago, Thanksgiving week, my wife and I set to drive home Wednesday evening like everyone else in America, and Dan called Monday, not with a briefing, with a verdict. Leave Tuesday before noon or don't leave. I mean it this time. Something in the "I mean it this time," an admission, you'll notice, about every other time, made us actually listen. We left Tuesday at 11. The storm arrived Wednesday morning, 8 hours ahead of every forecast on television, and glazed 4 states in ice that closed the interstates through. Friday. We ate Thanksgiving dinner warm and smug while the news showed 60-mile backups exactly where we would have been. Dan has never once mentioned it. He didn't have to. The group chat retired the blue sky joke for almost a year, and when my wife flew home that Sunday, she called him at takeoff for the first time in her life. And said, "Track me. That story's over." 40 years of unsolicited forecasts, one perfectly called ice storm, and a man who now watches his little plane icons with official family sanction. Honestly, every weather service should be so lucky, and every daughter should lend to 6 voicemails saying she's over Ohio with a good tailwind. And for our last story tonight, we go to the gentlest dispute in my family's history, my grandparents, who have been married for either 52 or 53 years, depending on which of them you ask. My grandparents disagree about how long they've been married. Not bitterly, not even actively. They have simply, for as long as anyone can remember, maintained two different counts of their own marriage, 1 year apart, each fully confident neither. Willing to check. Grandpa's count says 53, Grandma's says 52. The discrepancy traces back, as near as the family's historians can establish, to their actual wedding, which happened in a courthouse in late December. Weeks ahead of the church ceremony the following January, for reasons involving Grandpa's work transfer, and, the aunts have always implied, with great enjoyment, a certain impatience. Grandpa counts from the courthouse, that's when it was legal. Grandma counts from the church, that's when it was real. They have restated these positions, verbatim, at every anniversary for 5 decades, with the mild finality of two people reading their lines in a play they both like. The practical result is that my grandparents celebrate 2 anniversaries. December brings a small one, dinner out, just them, which Grandpa calls the real anniversary, loudly enough for Grandma to hear him from the other room, where she is not listening. January brings the family one, cake, cards, grandchildren, which Grandma presides over as the true and only anniversary, and at which Grandpa, every year, when asked to say a few words, begins, well, as of last month, and is handed his cake early to stop him. The family long ago sorted itself into camps, not by conviction but by temperament. The romantics hold with Grandma in the church. The literalists side with Grandpa and the courthouse. My Uncle Pete, the corrections man, you remember him, has been visibly suffering over this for 40 years because the marriage certificate exists. It's in the firebox in their bedroom closet. The whole thing could be settled in 90 seconds. And the one time he said so out loud, at their 40th, the entire family turned on him with a single voice, and my grandmother patted his arm and delivered. The ruling that governs to this day, Petey, honey, some facts are none of the record's business. Because everyone understands, even Pete now, that the number was never the point. The disagreement is the anniversary. 2 people who agree on where the towels go, what the thermostat should read, and what 70 years of shared groceries should contain, keeping alive one. Small, warm, unwinnable dispute on purpose, because it's theirs. Every December, dinner. Every January, cake. Every year, one more for him than for her, forever, like a 2-step only they know. Last January, at the 52nd or 53rd, my youngest niece, 6 years old, asked them how long they'd been married, straight out, the way only. 6-year-olds ask, and my grandparents looked at each other for a moment across the cake. And Grandpa said, long enough, and Grandma said, not nearly, and that, the family has unanimously ruled, is the official count now, long enough. Not nearly. Case closed. That story ends there. And honestly, that's the one to fall asleep on. That's all the stories I have for you tonight. 20 little systems, 20 families quietly adapting around the people they love, the ledgers and the group chats, the casseroles and the goodbyes that take an hour. If you're still awake, thanks for staying up with me. And if you're not, if you drifted off somewhere between the wedding binder and the weather reports, that's exactly what tonight was for. The stories will keep. Families always do. Sleep well, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.